We come to our final session before lunch, and it's a big one. The next climate COP, From Pledges to Action is its title. Of course, Glasgow last year witnessed the formation of new private sector and finance alliances and initiatives that promise to create positive transitions towards meeting the Paris Agreement targets. There's no doubt that there must be a deep transformation of the world's economy, and the private sector needs to play a big part in that. Private finance can help fund private sector initiatives and turn billions committed to climate investment through public channels into trillions of total climate investment. But unlocking systemic change does require collaboration, ambitious commitment and near-term action across the entire financial system. So in this session, we're going to review progress made by some of the leading private sector entities and alliances to understand whether we're ready to show progress as we approach the next climate COP in Sharm el-Sheikh in Egypt, of course. Right, so let me get the panelists up on stage. We've got two joining us remotely. I'll mention those first. Irene Feiger is Head of Climate Strategy and Circular Economy at BMW Group. Dr. Li Zhang is Director, Green Inclusion and Carbon Neutrality Center, joining us from China. And then here with us, Annika Ramsköld, Head of Sustainability at Vattenfall. Welcome, Annika. Take a seat wherever you like. Nina Ekelund is Executive Director at the Haga Initiative. Come on up, Nina. And Vanessa Butani is Vice President Sustainability at Electrolux. A warm welcome to all of you. Look, we've got our work cut out for us. I am going to kick it off with Irene at BMW. And it's a question I ask a lot of the corporates. And in fact, I put it to your CEO, Oliver Sipser, last year. And that is this balance that you need to find between a responsibility to shareholders and your stewardship of the planet. How difficult is it to find that balance, and is it getting any easier, Irene?
I think it's very important that you take into account the most important and large aspects where you save CO2 at the lowest cost, right? That's why we do an abatement curve for everything we do. So we look into each aspect of our supply chain, for example, and we take into target those things where we can achieve the most CO2 reduction at the lowest possible cost. To your question whether it's getting easier, I think it's definitely getting easier in terms of the technology, and the innovation is going into CO2 reduction measures as our suppliers actually see and realize that it's very important for us to reduce CO2. So next to quality and price, is the CO2 that is associated with a certain material, we take that into account when we choose for a supplier. And as they know that there is a lot of investment in the steel industry, in the plastic industry, etc., going into CO2 abatement techniques. And that's why I think it's going to get easier in terms of innovation. But of course, marginal costs for reducing CO2 increase. So the lower you go, a 10% reduction at a much later stage is going to be more expensive.
Yeah, okay.
So there are two sides to it.
All right, Irene. And look, I'll come on to the actions that BMW, the specific actions that BMW is taking in just a moment. But a similar question to the other two corporates here, Electrolux and Vattenfall. You know, this idea of finding that balance between, I guess, you know, maybe this is the wrong way of putting it, but a fiduciary duty to your clients and your shareholders, and your conscience, your stewardship of the planet. How hard, let me ask you, Vanessa, yes, Vanessa, right? How hard do you find that?
I think that's a big question, but I think with the risk of sounding far too corporate here, I mean, what we're really trying to do is integrate this into our business strategy, right? So there is no difference. So we have to do this because that's the right way for us to do business going forward, because we see, right, our customers, retailers, we're a major appliance manufacturer, right? They're asking us for this. They're asking us to share with them, what are we doing, how are we doing? Consumers are asking us for this all the time. So it's not like two separate questions. It has to be together, and we have to put it together.
And I agree, and I hear that from a number of corporates. I guess the question has to be, how successful are you being in bringing those two things together, in making them one? How realistic a proposition is that really?
Yeah. Again, good question. I think I was sitting in discussions this morning about looking at recycled steel, green steel, recycled plastics. How are we going to get even more of that into our products? And it's all about getting it right from the design so that we can get the business case to work. And that's what it's all about. But the business case can't just be also looking at simply the financials. As Irene was saying, we need to be looking at putting in even more. What is the cost of carbon, and how is that going to impact our business case? If I look at other areas where we're looking at in terms of energy and replacing really high energy processes that we have, and I'm sure you share that with BMW also, that it's really tough, and those business cases, to get that together, it's still very expensive to change those processes.
Yep.
So it's a constant discussion.
Annika, how is it getting easier to, and maybe this is the wrong way of putting it as well, but is it getting easier to tell big institutional investors, if you don't like what we're doing, you don't have to invest in our company?
I'm not sure that it gets, that's also a tricky question, but I think investors start realizing the same that we have realized, that, I mean, also like Vanessa says, we need to listen to all the stakeholders externally, regardless of whether it's customers or suppliers or others, and we need to ensure that we are in tune with the expectations. And it's very clear that we need to be at the edge of doing that, and for Vattenfall, we know that we need to be part of enabling the fossil-free living within a generation, and we just need to decarbonize. And I think the way to do that is, if we don't act here and now, I mean, you can say that it's challenging to be an early mover, but it would even be devastating to not do the steps that are needed. And I think that's something that the investors also see these days. No, I don't think it's becoming much more almost a prerequisite. You need to be tuned in to have a sustainable business model also for the future.
Yeah, and Nina, just a comment from you generally on this, from a Nordic perspective, and what businesses in this region are doing and how successful they're being. Do you think there has been a successful shift, and do you think it's supported from the policy side? Yeah, go ahead, Nina. Yeah.
Yeah, sorry. It has been successful in Sweden, and just to mention a number, we have been looking at the companies, the 100 largest companies in the stock market, and we asked how many of you are halving your emission to 2030. So 2 years ago, 1 out of 5 companies were halving their emissions to 2030. That's quite ambitious. The year after, it was 1 of 3 companies halving their emission, and this is the big companies in Sweden. So, and then you also have to do it and follow up and do the measures. But we can see that some companies are able to do the change and be forerunners in the climate transformation. It's possible for them. Most of the companies have to struggle. And what we need to do is to have the dance with policy. It won't work if we don't get the right price on carbon, as Vanessa mentioned. We need the right price, because today it's cheap and we don't have a sufficient right price. And we also have extremely big subsidies. So we need policy on board.
It's a nice, Annika, I will come to you in just a sec. It's a nice way to put it, a dance with policy rather than a tussle or a fight, right?
I don't think we should fight, because it's better to dance with them.
Absolutely right. Annika, go ahead.
No, I wanted to say I had the privilege of being at COP in Glasgow, and I think just to say, you asked whether Scandinavian companies are sort of showcasing and going ahead. And there we had the chance to showcase in the Swedish pavilion that we are able to make full value chains that are fossil-free. So we show that all the way from the mine with LKAB, and then via the steel production using fossil-free electricity to make the hydrogen, then produce the fossil-free steel, sell it to Volvo Group. They make a vehicle. That vehicle is deployed by the construction company Skanska.
Yep.
So it's not only, it's all these type of collaborations, not only individual sort of lighthouse projects, but really building full value chains.
You know, now you've said that, you know I've got to ask you whether you're selling this stuff to BMW yet.
Well, we are not the ones selling.
Okay.
We're part of,
Okay.
of the joint venture.
Okay.
It's SSAB that is the one
I'll ask
that
Irene
actually
in a
sells.
second. All right, Li Jiang, let me bring you in here. I mean, you've heard what the speakers have said so far. You know, with Glasgow in the rearview mirror and Sharm el-Sheikh coming up, how optimistic do you feel generally?
I think the most important thing is whether the consumers will pay the bill to purchase those good products with low carbon emission. And according to the IPCC's recent report, the average household consumption carbon emission accounts for about 72% of total carbon emission globally. A Chinese Academy of Sciences report points out that China carbon consumption side, China's consumption side, including industrial products and the household consumption, has accounted for about 53% of total carbon emission. So the carbon reduction from the consumption side constitutes a serious challenge. I think it's not only the producer can make good products with low carbon emission, but also the consumers, they need to pay the bill and they need to consider how to choose more less carbon emission products.
And how much, how supportive is government in this? How supportive is the private sector in this when it comes to choices the consumer is making? To what degree are they being led correctly in your view?
Yeah, as you know that, climate challenges in China is really a big challenge to the Chinese government as well as business sectors. And at the COP26 last year, the parties bridged the differences and broadened consensus to reach the implementation roles of Paris Agreement, including drawing up some important document. But it seems that a global effort to tackle climate change has not yet succeeded. And in China, energy use is still dominated by fossil fuel in China, and the contribution of new energy sources is not very promising yet. So I think with China's rapid social economy development in the past 40 years, carbon emissions from the production side have remained high. So we need more commitment and actions from not only the public governmental policy side, but also all the forces from the different sectors, including the private sector, the public sector, civil society as well.
Yep, okay. Irene, let me quickly come back to you on this clean steel question. Is BMW using it?
Yes, we are buying green steel. We are buying all different kinds of green steel. But I would like to refer to a question on price and who is going to pay for it. I think it's very important to differentiate between what price do they pay in terms of compared to what. What Nina has said before on the CO2 price, I think is a prerequisite for green steel to come into the market, like expensive green steel, like hydrogen-based steel. Because if there is no CO2 price that the industry needs to pay, it's going to be very hard to factor in hydrogen-based steel at big scale. So I think the prerequisite in order to have these large industrial processes decarbonized, you need to have a CO2 price for all the industries for heavy industries, for example, which is in Europe, most of them don't pay the CO2 price.
Yeah.
So I think that's a very important point.
And on a carbon price, I mean, what do you make of the progress so far, or lack of progress, some might say,
Pardon, I
on the
didn't hear.
carbon price, CO2 price?
What the price is?
Yeah, no, what it is, yes, but and also the huge disparities in price globally, but how successfully it's being implemented and used.
We started in 1990 in the Nordics, 91 in Sweden, and the Finnish were like a few months before us with the carbon tax. So we had it for a long time, and we can really see, and maybe Vattenfall can mention what the outcome is. We can see that it really had lowered the emission, especially in the energy sector. So we can really see it's been positive. And then we got the EU ETS, and that's a carbon price also. And that has been very, very successful, looking at all the companies in the industry and energy sector in the EU ETS, emission trade scheme. So that has been successful as well. So the combination of the carbon tax and EU ETS has been fantastic to move business. So now, I would say, Nordic businesses are prepared for the climate transformation and have lowered their emission and energy costs. So, and that is also good from a competitive perspective, because I think we stay quite strong.
Irene, I'm going to come back to you, and it's a question I'm going to then put to Vattenfall and Electrolux as well. You know, when it comes to targets, net zero targets, 2030, 2040, 2050, I think what concerns a lot of people, and concerns me when I speak to the leaders of these companies, is the short term. You know, what happens over the next 2, 3, 4, 5 years? And you know, with all due respect, the auto manufacturers come out with new electric models and big targets that will get them to hit peak emissions and then get them to bend the curve down over the next 20 years. But how short-term focused are you, and do you need to be?
So we have very clear near-term targets. We have targets for 2030 for all our scopes. And these targets are monitored every year. And they are not only monitored, but there's a very clear consequence if the targets are not met. And these consequences that the payment of the board in part depends, so the benefits depend in part on the sustainability measures. So CO2 for the scopes, those targets are a part of how the board and top management gets compensated. So I think that's a very, very effective measure to take.
Yep.
And it's monitored every year.
Has BMW hit peak emissions?
Yes.
You have hit peak emissions. So you're on your way down. This curve is bending down from now on. Okay.
Yes.
Same question to Vattenfall and Electrolux. Irene talks about 2030 as short term. Is it short term enough? I mean, what happens over the next 8 years? You know, what about year 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6?
Well, first of all, I want to say, from Vattenfall's side, we've started to act already. So, I mean, we set a target to keep ourselves within 2 degrees warming back in 2019, and already, and that was compared to the baseline 2017. Already 2020, we had fulfilled the target for 2030. So we had cut our emissions in own activities by more than 40%. So we doubled those ambitions, and now we have a target fully in line with 1.5 degrees, and also net zero in the full value chain by 2040. And of course, we measure every year the progress. And I'm happy to say that every single year we see clear reductions in our own activities, but definitely we work a lot in the supply chain, and also there we have clear targets measured year by year that we are reducing also from supply chains, and definitely support our customers to do the same.
Yeah. I mean, it's admirable, Vanessa, but it's clearly not enough when you look at the science. The IPCC report, 1.5 degrees, it's not enough. We're not going to get there on time, right? That must be the constant reminder in your minds, on your consciences, when you make these business decisions.
Definitely, and I think to echo a little bit what we've heard from colleagues is, I mean, it's great that we set the targets, the long-term targets, and we set the short-term targets, and it's really about the motivation. How do you get people to move, right? And for us, that really has been a few things, and one of them is looking at, well, if we tie this to their salary, then that's going to happen. So 850 of our managers in the company now have their long-term bonus plan tied specifically to the carbon reduction. And we're seeing really action happening from that because we're hitting, sorry, but where it hurts, right? And I think that also helps everybody to see, this is how I can make an impact, this is how I can participate, and I think that's very important.
Yep.
Then we've also got green financing that we work with as well, which forces us as a company to keep on our toes, to keep reporting what we're doing. So all these things, I mean, of course, we've set science-based targets. We were one of the first companies, first 100 to do so. We're following up on that, we're reporting on that, but really it's about how do you motivate the people to actually make the change? And we found certain ways to do that.
Okay, yeah, no, that's 850 people. I mean, yeah, Nina, go ahead.
Just a comment, it's so important to follow up and do the daily work. In the business network that I run, the Haga Initiative, it started 12 years ago, and then we had a target, 40% reduction until 2020. The companies succeeded it with 80% reduction, 70% reduction, and the new target is net zero emission until 2030, and at least we need to halve the emission because the UNEP report said we need to five-fold the ambitions to stay below 1.5 degrees in the world. So, and the daily work that Annika told us about that you need to follow up every year is so important. But the big challenge for the companies right now is how to handle scope 3, the value chain. And that means we need new business models, and we need to think, because before it was about the company's own work. Now it is about business to business, business to consumer.
Yep.
It's about the business strategy. It's so much harder, but it will affect everyone, because when these big companies say that they want to have a net zero or half their emissions, that means that other companies need to step up.
Yep, go ahead, Annika.
No, and I wanted to build on that because we are at Vattenfall embarking on a number of exciting partnerships exactly in order to tackle the scope 3 emissions. So it's really about aligning with those that are producing the steel, like the hybrid case or the cement, that both key components when we build a lot of new wind farms. But it's also through this first movers coalition. And I think this is, if we start talking about the scope 3 and to tackle emissions from suppliers, here we need to show investors and those that are producing these breakthrough technologies that there is a clear demand for these technologies. And here I think First Movers Coalition is an excellent example. A number of companies, and Vattenfall was one of the founding members there, we collectively tell the manufacturers that this is how much collective power we have, and we are asking for these completely breakthrough technologies and gather that.
Lee, I'll come back to you in just a second, but I'm, on this point, I do want to put it to the three corporates. Do you have examples in which you've told suppliers you're not going to do business with them because they're not clean enough?
I can start off by saying the first step is to say that we put requirements when we buy things, and we ask for innovative solutions. We want to see that they are using recycled material or fossil-free materials. And then, so that was the first step, to start putting these requirements.
And it's followed strictly, this,
and it's followed. In the very beginning, and here I think we need to be frank, when we started to post these requirements, let's say 5 years ago, a lot of the suppliers would say, no, we don't have that, or it's too costly, and are you willing to pay for all of that? But by starting to ask for it, and then start looking at which of the suppliers are willing to try to walk down that road and actually offer these things, that's when you start getting them on board. And now we have a number of examples where we have put these sharp requirements, they are much lower, and the interesting thing, if I refer to the previous panel, there you were discussing how much more expensive is it. The interesting thing is that we were prepared that it would be more expensive, but it's on par or sometimes even lower, because you recycle material, you do use resources in a more efficient way.
Irene, how bold is BMW when it comes to telling suppliers in no uncertain terms they're not clean enough?
We have a very clear three-step process. The first thing is we require green energy wherever possible. The second one is we require green thermal energy. And the third thing is a secondary material quota that we set for all the products. So each product line has a very clear secondary material target. Actually, I think the first two are rather easy, especially the first to substitute gray for green energy is really easy in most of the markets. In some markets, you still have an energy market that is very conservative. There it's hard. So we work also together with trade unions there to get more green energy into the market even. So to have the basis for our suppliers to be able to source this green energy. The hardest part, to be honest, is secondary material quotas. So we buy everything that we get in terms of quality. It's very hard in the car industry to get the quality that you need for example, for secondary steel. We have very strict requirements in terms of performance for the steel. So there, I think we need more secondary material in the quality that we need, and that is also that relates to the recycling industry and how the recycling industry is organized. At the moment, most of the products all end up in one shredder. So what you get out of the shredder is very unclean material. So you get contaminated steel, for example, there is copper in it. That's not usable for us. That usually ends up in the cement industry, in the steel, in the construction sector. So we need a much better separation technology to use these materials.
Vanessa, very, very quickly on that point, Scope 3 suppliers. What is electric? Are you bold enough?
Absolutely, and we put together sort of an overview of the supplier, a full picture of the supplier together with our purchasing team, looking at, of course, the classic pieces, the quality, the price, obviously, but also how are they meeting our social requirements and how are they meeting our climate requirements. And there we are leaning on the CDP program actually to help us. So we're encouraging we're asking all of our suppliers to report through CDP, and now we've taken the first step of saying, okay, now you've reported some, they're at very different levels, and now we're starting to say, okay, and now we're starting to expect a better and better ranking from them. But of course, it's always this working together, explaining why, sharing best practice, and getting the movement to happen.
Li Jiang, are you heartened by what you've heard from the corporates on the panel today?
Well, great. I drive my BMW 525 for about 10 years and decided to change a new electricity car, but I'm waiting for the BMW made a good model in China. So as a consumer, I think what's the choice of the consumer is very important. As I said before, I set up a small company called Green Inclusive network technology together with a former UNEP officer and a couple of friends 2 years ago in China. We called Green Inclusive. And we launched a Green Inclusive Cloud, carbon emission reduction digital ledger based on the group standard of All China Environment Federation quantitative guidelines for greenhouse gas emission reduction by citizen and green and low carbon behaviors. And guided by the Ministry of Ecology and Environment, the Green Inclusive Cloud builds a nationwide, unified and applicable underlying interconnection platform, forms personal and corporate carbon ledgers, and explores diversified model of green finance rebate incentive mechanism in order to crack the carbon emission reduction problem at the consumption end. So if the consumer to take public transportation instead of a private cars, fossil fuel cars, and their carbon emission reduction amount could be calculated and accounted by our APP. And for example, in the past Beijing Winter Olympics, we provide support, we called low carbon consumption to support the Beijing Winter Olympics, and over over 3.3 million users joined us, and in total reduced emission by more than 40,000 tons CO2 in about 3 months.
Okay.
So this is an example that how consumer can change their behaviors, and certainly it also drives the producers to produce more green, low carbon products.
Yeah, good. Thank you so much. Look, I want to come back to the title of this, which looks ahead to the next climate COP, and get a sense from each of you. And Irene, let's start with you. What do we want to see? What do we need to see in Egypt that we did not see in Glasgow?
So I think we have very clear targets for nations at the moment. So we have NDCs. And we have private initiatives like SBTI that we also follow that actually break down these NDCs for corporates. But there is no official initiative that basically legitimizes CDCs. So I think it would be very important to have very clear CDCs for multinational companies.
Mm-hmm. Okay, Annika?
Well, I fully agree. I think, and what we need to see is that these national plans has to be backed up with very clear actions. And I also would like to see more of a discussions on the regulatory framework that needs to be in place in order to enable that. I think we've already addressed the EU ETS and the driving force on carbon pricing, but we need to secure also for the industry transformation that the policies are in place to enable that. But in general, I would say it's so much more about the actual title. We need to see the clear actions that are taken. So similar as I referred to in the COP26 in Glasgow, where we could show the full value chain of fossil-free steel all the way to how it's used. We need to see much more of those tangible activities.
Vanessa, what do you think?
I would echo what has been said, but I think also it's looking now to the consumers as well and really enabling the consumers, helping us to help show the consumers and to allow them to make more educated choices and see the real difference. I think specifically for us also it is this idea of make it easier for us to make the investments in the greener energy, the greener choices, because it's too difficult.
Go ahead.
I have 4 bullet points I think I would like to see. First, I really appreciate the cooperation Sweden as a government have together with India. And I think those kind of collaborations under the wings of UN, I think is great to understand our differences and to share experiences. That is something we can see more of in Egypt. 2, the synergies. We need to talk about the synergies about climate. Synergies reducing climate impact with health, with more employments, with growth. Talk about the synergies and also the benefits of reducing climate. I think that is the most second important point. And also, there is a handful key solutions. For example, we talked about, Annika talked about fossil-free steel. We need to talk about these key solutions more and stress them. And finally, the most also, even if it's the 4th, the carbon price. We need to talk about carbon price, if it's the carbon tax, if it's the EU ETS or so. So that is important.
Yeah. If there's enough integrity in the carbon market, the voluntary carbon market as well, I think is another thing that was discussed a lot at 26. Very quickly, Annika?
Yes, I realize one key thing is, I mean, we talk about that a lot of this transformation needs more fossil-free electricity. And I think one thing that worries me and keeps me awake at night is that we need to be able to do it quickly enough. And that means that the permitting processes need to be swifter. And it's also the general thing about acceptance. In order to do this transformation, we will need access to seabeds, to land, in order to build more of the production and the electricity lines that needs to get to these plants that are going to produce the fossil-free steel or cement. And this acceptance of that not in my backyard is always there. Somehow we need to dare to tackle this one. Of course, it's extremely important to balance all the different interests, and everyone should have their saying. But we must realize that we need this access to land.
Yes, yes. Okay, good. Look, there's one or two more things I want to say very quickly, and then I want to open up to the floor, and then we're going to hear some closing comments from President Kelapile from ECOSOC. The thing I wanted to mention, and we haven't mentioned, are offsets. And what your views are on these. And the reason I bring it up is because I was doing a discussion with another chief executive. I'm not going to tell you who it was, but I'll tell you in a second. But it surprised me. This chief executive said that CEOs are using offsets as a fig leaf. And they shouldn't be. And we need to move away from that. What are your views first on offsets, Annika?
Well, our view is, both my personal and Vattenfall, is that we should do everything we can to remove the carbon that is there. And the offsetting is the very last sort of action that you do when you tried everything else. And right now, the offsetting would need to be taken for the scope 3 that we said is so difficult to tackle. Yep. But here, I think it's more, if we do offsetting, it should be in actual carbon removal. And that's where we need to have bio, energy, CCS, etc. But I fully agree. I'm worried about all these pledges to reach net zero, because a lot of that will be tackled by consumption.
What do you think, Irene, on the offsetting, and how much of your goals are, or how much is offsetting part of your goals?
I'm completely with Annika. You remove as much as you can. So for the production, for example, we have 80% goal per car until 2030. But we already have a CO2 neutral production since 21 by offsetting. So what we can't get out there, we have a very clear offsetting strategy, and we follow the same strategy actually as the German government. So we buy the same certificates. So we think those are valid certificates to buy. So I think you need to be very, very strict in terms of what kind of certificates you buy, and you need to look very closely what they sell to you, because there is a large market out there. There are claims that you get a ton of CO2 for 3 cents. We don't believe that that's viable. So you really need to have a very stringent strategy there.
Yeah, Vanessa?
We would much rather look at the underlying processes and really change those to make sure that we make them, sustainable, really, truly.
Is that what you're doing?
That's what we're doing, right? So
doing.
we have reached 78% reduction in our scope 1 and 2 already now, ahead of our target for ourselves, which was 25. We're targeting fully neutral in our own operations by 2030. And why have we said 2030? Because we need to get through these tough processes, right? We have heating in all our buildings, enameling, painting, think about an oven or a fridge. It's huge processes and we need to break those down, and that's what we're doing to see where can we actually make a change.
Yeah, very quickly.
Just short, when I talked about our goals in the Haga Initiative and net zero by 2030, we don't count offsets, and that I think is very important. But you can use offsets as an internal price in the company. So that I think is a way to move, because then you get probably the right price internally. And also, I think it's correct, very good, like Annika mentioned also, talking about the negative emission in Article 6. I think that is a new challenge. So how to get the negative emissions on place, I think that is the next step in this.
Yeah. By the way, it was Scott Kirby at United Airlines who said that about the fig leaf, which I thought was quite admirable, I must say. Look, I'm going to open it up to our audience for your questions, and then we will get to ECOSOC's president. Yeah, right here.
Is it working? Yes, thank you. So my concern was that it was said that consumers need to pay the bill, but most of the global consumers, they don't have the financial power to do so. And then I was wondering if we're talking about a carbon tax or other costs such as eco-labels, how can we assure that those costs aren't fully transferred to the consumers, and so they can't make a switch to sustainable products? Thank you.
Lee, you've said a bunch about consumers. I don't know if you heard that question. I don't know if you want to tackle that.
Well, it's a really good question that the carbon tax should not only paid by the consumers, but the behavior change of the consumer can drive the producers to produce more and good products with low carbon emission. I think this is a choice of the consumers. Certainly, yes, the carbon tax can play important role, and I think finally in total, the consumers' consumption behavior can make a big impact and big changes, I believe.
Anyone else want to have a go at that?
Yes. So I think once you make the change, it's actually it could also get cheaper. So for example, if I charge my car, I pay €6 per 100 kilometers. If I fuel my car with petrol, I pay €16. So it's already there, yeah, the innovation. So I think that it's twofold. You need to invest and then you get innovation, and that drives prices down because renewable energy is so much cheaper than fossil-based energy. So I think that's very important to have. You might have an initial investment, but in the long run, it's going to be much cheaper for societies.
Okay. Yep.
I was just going to add, from a consumer perspective, what we see is our responsibility is for sure to make the great appliances, right, and make them as energy efficient as possible and resource efficient water, what it may be. We also need to work to help consumers to understand that the behavior needs to change as well and how you use those appliances. We see in our studies that people are washing their clothes or cooking their food in the same way their parents did, right? And there's so much we can change to make that more efficient, more modern, and really make that saving happen for consumers. For us, it's not as easy as which plug you use, right? There, it's really about lowering the temperature of your laundry or using different techniques in cooking that people aren't aware of.
Yeah. Nina?
Yes, I just want to mention circularity and sharing economy. I think these kind of business models is important in the future, others we won't succeed as well. So I will mention this.
Okay, good. Anyone else with a question for our panel? Yeah, gentleman over here.
Hello there, it's Martin Brocklehurst here. My question is to all the corporates. Are you engaging in research to find new specifications for secondary raw materials that are different from primary raw materials, reflecting the point of origin of the secondary raw materials, as has been done by Jaguar Land Rover for aluminium? So in other words, you're not asking for secondary raw materials to the same specification as primary raw materials, but you're actually looking at what they can deliver to you for the reason that you want to use them, so that you don't actually make it more difficult to use the secondary raw materials.
Irene, go ahead.
Yes, thanks. That's a very good question, actually. So before we had, our engineers actually had to prove that the secondary material that they are using is the same quality as the first, as the primary material. And we've changed that. There is a claim now to our engineers that says secondary first. So they actually, if they're using primary material for quality reasons, they need to specify why. So we have changed that claim, and we are very much looking into what kind of secondary material we can actually buy that is different from primary material.
Okay. Anyone else? Electrolux?
Yeah, I just wanted to add, we talked a lot about plastic, because we have a lot of plastics in our products, and recycled plastic is something that's been high on the agenda for us. And we've put it a lot inside the products where you can't really see it. But now we've been doing a lot more testing with putting that in the aesthetic parts of the products where you really can see it. And of course then, you know, with recycled plastics, you think about your classic refrigerator, it's very white. With recycled plastic, you can't get that color. But we're seeing with our results and in studies with consumers that that's exactly what they want. And especially when we tell them this is recycled plastic versus this one that is not, then they say, well, I want that one. Why didn't you tell me that, right? So we see for sure there is this demand for it, and that it really encourages us to be able to put that even more like front and center, and tell the story about it, because people want it.
Go ahead, Annika.
And for Vattenfall, we don't buy raw materials, so we rather buy a wind turbine or something, but we have the dialogue with the suppliers specifically to say, for us it's important that it's a low carbon footprint, and then we have discussions, what would it take to have recycled material, what would it take to have new fossil-free material. So that's a constant dialogue, and I think here we try to take our part in the sense that we try to have the dialogue on how to produce the fossil-free steel. We collaborate, and I want to raise another exciting collaboration we have to enable production of sustainable aviation fuels. Here using fossil-free electricity to produce the hydrogen, but then we use the carbon dioxide from our district heating plant, sort of recycling that one into making the sustainable aviation fuel. So we try to do wherever we can, but it's very much for us more having the dialogue with the suppliers.
Yep, okay. Look, I'm going to have to wrap this up, but I do want to finish this, and do stay where you are, because I'd like to invite Colin Kelapile, the president of the UN ECOSOC, onto the stage. Now, ECOSOC, of course, as you all, I'm sure, know, are, I think it's fair to say, custodians of the SDGs. So it would be super to get your view, Mr. President, of what you've heard today from the corporates here ahead of COP27. Whether you're heartened by what you've heard here, whether you think a net zero carbon ambition is enough to achieve the SDGs. Please.
No, thank you very much. I can't say I heard everything. I was not here earlier on, but I came at the right time to hear the panelists who just spoke. And let me say that as the moderator has observed, ECOSOC is the platform where the supervision of the implementation of the SDGs and the 2030 agenda takes place. I'm therefore delighted really to hear this very impressive attention to the many aspects that need attention, especially from the companies and the industry that are all here. Let me say that at a time when we are not doing that well in the implementation of the SDGs, any pledge is welcome. We particularly welcome the climate pledge. It is very significant, but we also need to remember it is only part of what we need to do if we are to achieve the 2030 agenda. You would recall that when the 2030 agenda was adopted in 2015, it was clearly the case that the 17 goals are indivisible and integrated. So the agenda is treated as one outfit. This means that meaningful impact can only be realized if we pursued all the goals with equal attention and equal ambition. So those companies that are meeting their 2040 target will certainly help spur the development and deployment of the needed solutions that can help us meet the broader climate goals. And this is hugely important. But I listened also to the panelists that for an impact of scale to move the needle of the SDGs implementation significantly, this requires that many other companies, as you observed, should also be part of this process across many sectors. This, of course, should cover the transport sector, the telecommunications, the power generation sector, and the variety of manufacturing sector, and the biotech and pharmaceuticals, the agriculture, and the retail. So I think I take that point very well. I think you're right on the point that much as we welcome this pledge, there can be more companies that can be part of it. So the deployment of climate solutions can also make an impact if the cost of those solutions is lower, is down. This can make it more affordable across the world. I think the developing countries in particular would also benefit on these solutions if the cost is affordable. the big tech's role in all this means that the digital tools, I listened yesterday also about the importance of monitoring and evaluation. So I think the big tech's role in it will mean that digital tools that are created in the process, such as for monitoring, should also be widely utilized, including in the developing countries. I think this speaks to the subject of the digital divide, the sharing of knowledge and technology across all countries. Let me, building on the integrated nature of the 2030 Agenda and the SDGs, observe that for the action on climate change to have an impact, it should also sort of spur action on the other SDGs, the 16 others. This should include feeding into the efforts to prevent poverty, for example, and hunger, and improving health, and producing more affordable clean energy, and providing decent work. So I'm making that point that climate action is one thing, but the impact on the other SDGs is equally important. One example which dates from 2019 is that more than 6 million people died as a result of bad air quality. So this speaks to the issue of reduction in fossil fuels to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, which could then reduce particulate emissions that kill. So this is one important link that I think actions on the climate science giving actionable results in terms of prevention of death. So let me sum it up again. There are two reasons why this particular pledge is not enough to achieve the SDGs. One is that it covers only some companies and not others. The second one is that climate is only one aspect of the SDGs. So I think there is a need to create the linkages, the cross-cutting linkages with all the other 16 SDGs. I've already referred to clean water and sanitation, good health and well-being, and also life below water and life on land. So I would end here with the challenge to the signatories of the climate pledge that I think they should broaden the focus to target not only the greenhouse gas emissions, but also the ecosystems. Talking about the land, I think Gabon was being referred to yesterday as a very important case. Air and water, plants and animals, and also sustainable value chains. I heard Scope 3 earlier being referred to. One practical opportunity to influence those additional factors will be in the net part of the net zero, for example, where there are carbon sink projects. This can be carefully designed to promote biodiversity, for instance. The additional point, being first movers towards a more circular economy with more sustainable value chains will also bring a competitive advantage in the markets. So let me close it here with another important additional contributor that needs to accompany all these actions. I think we've all realized that it is very crucial to improve access to education on all our populations on the importance of protecting the environment. So I think this should accompany all the efforts that are going on. And of course, the point I made in the context of technology transfer, I think collaboration with the developing countries in particular in all interventions and solutions is very key. But otherwise, I want to thank you, moderator, and the panelists. The views you are expressing at this particular event are very crucial in feeding into ECOSOC. I mentioned in July, we have a very important event which I look forward to seeing as many of you, if not all, participating. This is the high-level political forum on sustainable development, which will start on the 5th of July in New York. I thank you very much again.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Mr. President. And look, I want to thank our panel as well for your contribution, and to the two speakers who came remotely. It was a great way to end this. It's not quite the final session, but the penultimate session. So thank you, and Irene and Li Zhang, thanks to you both as well.